Welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Osman Aim, the EDC, and C. Sylvia Brown, Chief Curator here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Welcome to the first event for the BMA community for 2022. Tonight, we are thrilled to have some esteemed guests to discuss a wonderful new portrait on display here at the museum. Back in March of 2021, Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings commissioned the official portrait of her late husband, Congressman Elijah E. Cummings. You'll be hearing about that selection process shortly, but spoiler alert, Baltimore-based artist Jerrell Gibbs was chosen for the commission. We are pleased that the portrait is making its debut at the Baltimore Museum of Art and is on view for the wider community through January 9th, so 4 more days, before its permanent installation in the US Capitol. It is truly a privilege and an honor to be sharing this national treasure here in Congressman Cummings's hometown before it moves to the Capitol. Tonight, Jerrell will be in conversation with the Baltimore Museum of Art's Dorothy Wagner Wallis director, Christopher Bedford. Maya will be moderating this discussion. A few housekeeping items. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this talk. Viewers are welcome to enter their questions in the comments throughout the talk. And we will also try to answer as many questions as we can during the question and answer period. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings. Dr. Cummings is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Metro and the founder, president, and CEO of Global Policy Solutions. A wealth, health, and education equity expert, she has conducted extensive research and policy analysis on aging, Social Security, the social determinants of health, and racial wealth and achievement gaps. Her forthcoming book, Rageism, Racism, Ageism, and the Quest for Liberation Policy, to be published by Routledge, will be coming out later this year. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Cummings to begin this discussion.
Thank you so much, Asma. You know, there are so few opportunities in life where everything feels like they just fall into place just perfectly. But this opportunity, the opportunity for the commission of Elijah Cummings' official portrait, was one of those situations where everything from beginning to end just fell into place just perfectly. And it's because, in many respects, of the Baltimore Museum of Art and their leadership to help process and bring this painting and portrait to fruition. When I got a call from the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform in December of 2000, it was 2020 when I received it, I was just like, okay. They said, you're going to have to do a portrait for Elijah and you're going to have to lead the process. And I really didn't know where to turn. And even though I'd served on the board of the Baltimore Museum of Art, it wasn't my first thought. And after talking to a few people, it was determined that, you know, this would be a possibility. And so it was my distinct honor and privilege to work with several board members like David Warnock and certainly Amy to basically turn and talk to the folks at the Baltimore Museum of Art to do this. And so I'm very grateful for Chris Bedford and his entire team, including Asma and Carlin and Alexa and the entire communications team and the public outreach team for all of the work that they did to bring this to fruition. And of course, none of this would have happened without this special support from the donors and friends that supported the commission project. And those donors include, you know, certainly very important people in Elijah and my life. Many people know that Elijah and I got married in 2008. And I moved to Baltimore without knowing many people at all. And in the course of our social life, we were able to meet some wonderful, wonderful people. And many of those people were the same people who decided to support the commission. And so it is my distinct honor and privilege to share with you the sponsors of this portrait. The generous sponsorship of the commission portrait included Nancy Dorman and Stanley Mazeroff. Thank you, Nancy and Stan, for your generosity. Robert Meyerhoff and Rita Becker, dear friends that we met in 2008. Thank you, Robert and Rita. Under Armour Foundation and Kevin Plank, certainly, certainly dear friends to Elijah and I throughout the years. Bloomberg Philanthropy. While Michael Bloomberg was not certainly necessarily from Baltimore, he is a friend of Baltimore and certainly of Johns Hopkins. The Shelter Foundation and the Pearlstone Family Fund. They certainly have leaders, stellar leaders who are friends of ours and whom we love dearly and thank for supporting this effort. Lisa Harris Jones and Sean Malone, thank you so much for your support. And certainly Michelle Speaks and David Warnock, from whom I received the inspiration to actually turn to the Baltimore Museum of Art. And so thank you, Michelle and David, for your tremendous support. We also want to thank the donors who supported the presentation of the portrait in the Baltimore Museum of Art. And if you have not been yet, I urge you to go see it. It's a gorgeous display. And certainly it hangs in a lovely, lovely area of the Baltimore Museum of Art that you must see. But the Stone Ridge Fund of Amy and Mark Meadows supported that, as well as the Pearlstone Family Fund. Claire Zamowski-Siegel, the chair of the board of the Baltimore Museum of Art, whom I also must thank for her support. And again, Michelle Speaks and David Warnock. So thank you so much to these supporters for making this portrait possible. And certainly, we will talk about the process of how the portrait got made, but it could not have happened without the generous donation of time and energy of our stellar, certainly selection committee, who were comprised of, basically a virtual who's who of those in the art world in Baltimore City, certainly community-based, as well as those who represent formal institutions. So with that, again, I want to thank Christopher Bedford of the Baltimore Museum of Art, Jeffrey Kent, and certainly Lori Johnson, Lisa Harris Jones, Amy Frankel Meadows, Asma Naeem, Carlin Thomas, Troy Staten, and Kwame Webb. Thank you so much for sharing your time and certainly your energy. Now, it is my distinct honor and privilege today to get this conversation kicked off right. There is a gentleman that I have worked with since 2019 that I just think so highly of. I was able to serve on the board of the Baltimore Museum of Art, from 2017 to 2019. And in that time, I witnessed the stellar leadership of Christopher Bedford, who was a tremendous leader and continues to be a tremendous leader of the Baltimore Museum of Art. He is the Dorothy Wallis Wagner director of the Baltimore Museum of Art. And in the time that I worked with him, I saw his integrity, I saw his passion, I saw his understanding of the gaps that lie in basically in the art world, and his desire to close that gap, those gaps by focusing on equity in the art world and basically opening up certainly opportunities for more people of diverse backgrounds and more artists of diverse backgrounds. And so with that, it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome Christopher Bedford to the conversation. We know he and his team work very hard. And so Chris, I'd like to kick it off by asking you, why did you agree to accept to do this? It was a hard slog to bring this process to fruition. So if you could tell us why you agreed to do this and what the process was, we'd certainly love to hear from you.
Thank you, Maya. So I think, first of all, I'm not going to reiterate every thank you that Maya so eloquently shared with us, but I do want to thank you, Maya, from everybody involved in this process, all of the funders, all of the BMA staff so intimately involved in this. I think I can speak for Jerrell. I can speak for the other two artists who were finalists too, in saying that you're the inspiration for the work that we did. And when you ask why in the world I would agree to such a long process, I would first say you're incredibly persuasive. But in this case, it involved no persuasion whatsoever. And then I think more meaningfully and perhaps more emotionally, I will say there is no public figure who better embodies the mission and vision of the BMA than Elijah Cummings. So it seemed to me self-evident that we would be deeply engaged in this process. And before I discuss that a little bit, I did want to share with you one very brief personal anecdote. So when I arrived in Baltimore maybe 5.5 years ago, one of the first public outings I was involved in was a benefit at the School for the Arts. And Maya, I'm sure you were there. I had the honor of sitting at the table with the Josephs, great supporters of the BMA and great supporters of the School for the Arts as well. And we were, going through the usual course of a gala. Comments were being made, toasts were being made, food was being partially consumed, and Elijah Cummings was invited to give comments. And of course, I knew of him, his reputation, had seen him on television. But to see him stand up impromptu in front of 500 people, command everybody's attention, command everybody's emotion, and in the course of 3 minutes, focus everybody on the purpose of that gala, reduce many of us to tears, and generate the completely, I think, inevitable standing ovation, was one of my most memorable Baltimore experiences. And I think it was a sense of being in the presence of a true civil rights leader. And I didn't think that I would have that experience in my lifetime. That always struck me as a historical phenomenon. So when you approached us about the possibility of partnering on this commission, it seemed to me really apparent that we needed to capture that spirit and paint. And that is a tall order, to say the very least. And it also seemed very apparent to me that we needed to work with an emerging Baltimore-based and trained talent, because that's precisely what Elijah would have wanted. And as Asma said, spoiler alert, we have Jerrell Gibbs right here with us. And everybody knows, as a consequence of the glowing coverage in the New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, and elsewhere, who won that commission. But I did want to just briefly step us through the process. Art museums are like aircraft carriers. We move incredibly slowly, and we love our slowness. We're deliberate, we're intentional, and this process was exactly that. I believe Maya approached this in March of 2021, and we did not make the announcement until December of 2021. So it was a searching and I think deliberate, intentional, and rigorous process that gives us all a great deal of comfort in the way that we went about this work. So we're very fortunate at the museum to have a strong and varied, diverse in every sense curatorial department deeply embedded in the Baltimore art world. So it was obvious to us, to the committee, that we had to first go to those contemporary curators and ask who they might recommend. So I believe that we were directed towards about 30 Baltimore-based or Baltimore-trained or Baltimore-adjacent painters. And from that list of 30 really extraordinary practitioners, which I think attests to the depth and wealth of artistic practice in this city, we were able, through lots and lots of deliberation among our committee, and if anybody's familiar with our committee, everybody has an opinion, as they should, and everybody was liberal in sharing that opinion, myself included. We were able to land on 3 great artists, Ernest Shaw, Monica Akebwu, and of course, Jerrell, the eventual winner. So having moved through that whittling, we decided that the best next step was to do studio visits. And given the quality of the artist's work, it should come as no surprise that every single studio visit was overwhelming in its depth and its breadth. And I think we were variously convinced and variously charmed by each of the artists. And as is often the case when you're working in the context of a committee of people who have very strong opinions, we left with absolutely no firm opinion whatsoever. It was an exercise in relativism with everybody accruing different and unexpected merits, which was, a great pleasure. And I think when you have an experience of art history in the present that yields such fruit, it reminds you why we do the work that we do. So having done those studio visits and gotten to know the artists and having reached a point of complete and utter indecision, it was in fact Maya who had the inspired and I think slightly unorthodox idea of asking each one of the 3 finalists to produce a sketch. And from those sketches, we were then to reach a decision, daunting task as it was, as to who we wanted to perform the work of capturing Elijah's likeness in the official portrait that was to be installed in the Capitol in perpetuity. So daunting task, and I think entirely correct to elect to take this extra step. Knowing that this was a little bit unusual on our part, we did also make the concurrent decision to pay each one of the artists for their work in producing a sketch capturing Elijah's likeness and his spirit in their chosen material. And we also committed to add that work to the BMA's collection as a part of this process, to honor their work and also to memorialize that process in our permanent collection, which I think is enormously, enormously important. I think it's very notable that when we made that decision to buy a work by Ernest and buy a work by Monica, those were the first two works by those artists to enter the collection, and surely the first in a number in the coming years. So I'm just showing you here Ernest Shaw's watercolor and paper rendering of the Congressman. It's titled At the Crossroads 1, brought into the collection via the Allison Franklin Cooley Fund, and now resident in our brand spanking new vaults at the BMA. So extremely exciting. And I want to draw just attention to Monica's work, titled here Representative, charcoal and paper. Any student of media knows exactly how dexterous she would have to be to capture Elijah's likeness on that scale using charcoal and paper. And this work was every bit as dazzling in person, every bit as sensitive in person as it appears to be on your screen at the moment. And then, of course, there was Jerrell's contribution captured here, also now a part of our collection, attesting to this process and to the other competitors in that process. And so, of course, as you can see from the three finalists, it was a long and difficult discussion that eventually led us to Jerrell as the recipient of the official commission, which in turn led him to the core of his work, which is producing the portrait itself. And I'm showing you here a photograph taken at the BMA of the portrait without its frame, an image of the Congressman's likeness installed in all its majesty in the center of our American wing, newly and properly framed and available to our audience until January 9th. And I think Jerrell speaks about this dimension of his work more eloquently than anybody else. But there is an operation that's performed on the eye and on the heart and on the mind by these paintings that is very difficult to capture in a video or in a photograph. So I would really strongly encourage everybody to come to the museum in the next 4 days to have an experience of communion with this extraordinary portrait. Then finally, before I stop droning on, I did want to point out that we have two other works by Jerrell in our collection, and tip my hat here to Michael Sherman and his wife, Carrie, who are great supporters of this museum. Michael Sherman is a trustee, and it was through his generosity that we were able to bring this first double portrait into the collection, which we showed in 2021. And then the next slide, please. One other that is currently on view in the contemporary wing. So Jerrell has the honor of being represented by two paintings in the BMA at present. This one is called For Thomas, and it was brought into the collection through a fund created in part by the Pearlstone Family Foundation, who also helped fund, of course, the creation of Jerrell's portrait of Elijah E. Cummings. So that is how we landed at Jerrell. And fortunately for everybody present, we have Jerrell with us on this Zoom. So I think it's back over to you, Maya, for a second.
So Jerrell, I think it's back over to you. You've been in the New York Times, you've been covered in the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun. Literally, this thing has been all over. Baltimore Magazine, I just read an interview with you today on. How do you feel?
Overwhelmed, overjoyed, grateful, blessed, thankful, excited. I mean, I could go on for the rest of the night.
So, for a lot of people, they're just now being introduced to you. I mean, literally, your portrait of Elijah was carried and shown in the New York Times and in the Baltimore Sun. And people were wanting to know, who is Jerrell Gibbs? So, for those people who are just being introduced to your work, what do you want them to know about who you are, why you do what you do, and how you do it?
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm a God-fearing man. I'm a husband, and I'm a father, and obviously a painter. But also, I consider myself an artist as well, and it's something that I'm interested in exploring a little more deeply. I would have to say those are the most important things that I would, really focus on.
So it's interesting to me that you actually said you were an artist last. And so I
Yes.
actually want to probe this, because for me, I've got to tell you, I've read your story several times now, and it usually starts with one day you were at work as an adult, you were painting, and then you sent the paint, you were drawing, excuse me, doodling. And you sent your doodle to your wife, and your wife said it was fantastic, and she got you some painting materials, and then off you were. The next thing you know, you were a MICA graduate, and then you started painting professionally. But did you know as a kid, did you know that you were talented?
You know what? I used to draw a lot as a kid. Um, what I did know when I was a kid was I drew better than a lot of people my age at the time. I'll say that. And, it's not about me being arrogant or anything. It's simply, I noticed that what I was creating at a younger age wasn't similar to what I was seeing from others around my age.
And did you receive encouragement?
Not necessarily. And I think it was simply because the concerns of my family at that time was less about me creating art. It was less about the gifts that I had in that space, because it was an unknown space, especially where I'm coming from. It's unknown, it's unknown territory. There's no, how do you say this? There's no understanding of what art can do for you at that time in that space around, where we were in our lives. So no, it wasn't a huge investment in it. But that's nothing against my family. That's just a lack of us knowing at the time.
Well, it wasn't necessarily even family, school, teachers or anything like that. But I got to tell you, I empathize, because my dad had artistic talent, and then my brother and I were both award-winning artists in middle school and high school. Yet my parents constantly said, you cannot major in basket weaving when you go to college. And neither one of us actually ended up exploring our artistic sides. So, I completely empathize with you on that. So Jerrell, you were, you lived in Baltimore, in and around Baltimore all of your life. Can you tell us how Baltimore itself influenced you as an artist, and how you actually came at this commission of Congressman Elijah Cummings, who was also a native-born Baltimore son?
Yeah, Baltimore is everything. Baltimore is the thread of everything that I do. My family's from here, again, born and raised here in Baltimore. Lived here all my life. Went to school here, went to graduate school here. Had my family here. So everything that I put into my work is centered around Baltimore for the most part. It stems from Baltimore. The photos that I use as source material, they come from family photo albums, which were taken here in Baltimore, which are from family that lives here in Baltimore. So again, it's like the thread. It's a part of everything that I do, everything that I incorporate into my work. And I think that was significant as it related to the painting, creating the Honorable Elijah Cummings portrait, was the importance and the fact that he was from here as well. So I felt like there was energy, and there were stories, and there was just experiences that you get from growing up here in Baltimore City and just living in Baltimore, that were able to be a part and kind of be infused in the painting because of those similar characteristics that we have from where we come.
Right. So I've got to tell you, when you get up on the painting, it's incredible. If you have not seen it before it leaves Baltimore, you absolutely must go see it. And you get up on it and you just see strokes, and then you back up, and then you see a person, you back up a little bit more, and you know it's Elijah Cummings. It's not just Elijah Cummings' image. It is the essence of Elijah. And so that is artistic talent. Chris, I mean, I got it mixed up. I think in the process of our process, I called it Afro-Impressionism. But your team corrected me and said it's Afro-Expressionism. For those of us who don't know the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism, can you share with us what the difference is and why Jerrell's work is an exemplar of the latter category?
I can certainly try, and I'm not going to bore everybody with a lecture in art history, but what I will say, and I saw some of your questions in advance, and I think this is a sophisticated one that requires a little bit of sort of reflection and thought, particularly because both of those movements are rooted in traditions that arose in Europe during the 20th century. So, Impressionism, rooted in the French tradition. I associate Expressionism most directly with German artists, particularly working before and after, or in the war years. And I think, and particularly in listening to Jerrell speak, that emphasis on the specificity of a lived life, your desire to identify yourself first as a God-fearing man, as a father, and as a husband, that proximity between artistic practice or seamlessness between artistic practice and lived experience, to me is something that differentiates Expressionism as a historical phenomenon from the more optically focused Impressionist movement. So that had a lot more to do with, I think, formal innovation, light effects, the capacity of paint to capture the observed world, whether a person or a landscape. I think in the case of Expressionism, it has a lot more to do with interior life and society. Particularly in the hands of German artists who were dealing with the trauma of war and the need to capture that trauma in physical likeness. And I think Jerrell deals with a lot of that in his work. There's a quietness and a softness and a melancholy to a lot of those portraits, really, really deeply felt. And I think they're equal parts paint, and I think you got to this, Maya. That experience of being very close to the surface, and it's as if the painting's taking itself apart. And then as you move further back, it materializes. And then eventually you're in the presence of the spirit of the thing, which is very different than the materiality of the thing. So to me, this is, I know, a long and circuitous answer, but I think it's that issue of capturing feeling, interior life, and registering society's forces in an image, as opposed to a simple formal experiment. And that to me is far more expressionistic than impressionistic.
So that gives me a better sense, because Jerrell, I gotta tell you, I gave all of the selected finalists an opportunity to call me and ask me and talk to me about Elijah. 2 of the 3 artists did, and Jerrell was one of them. And Jerrell, I was just like, why are you asking me about what Elijah likes and, his favorite this and his favorite that? Why did you ask me these personal questions before making the portrait? And how does knowledge of these personal perspectives go into the making of the portrait?
So quick fact, that most may not know. While I was in graduate school, my concentration was humanistic studies.
No.
So I'm really interested in people, always have been. I can pick up on people's cues. Like, I'm really good with people. And I'm always interested in people. I'm interested in finding ways to build bridges for communication, being exposing people to different spaces, different ideas. Like, I've always been interested in that. But the questions that I asked you specifically in order to create the painting were just so I can get to know who he was. I didn't know him personally, unfortunately. And in order to create a painting of that magnitude, at least for me, I need to really know who I'm painting. I need to research as much as I can. I need to watch as many videos as I can. I need to read, to listen as much as I can to the person. I need to read I basically need to almost become the person in order to convey what it is that they are, through the use of paint. So that's what that was about. It was really about getting to know Elijah Cummings on a personal level, and really allowing the personal side of Elijah Cummings to influence the work.
Well, I just want you to know that I've had the opportunity to work with 2 artists on Elijah projects in the last 2 years. One was you, and the other one was the great thespian Lawrence Fishburne, also an award-winning artist. And he asked me similar questions that you did because he did the audiobook for Elijah's book. And at the time I was just like, okay, you're reading an audiobook. Why do you need to know what his favorite songs are? Why do you need to know if he was left-handed or right-handed? You did the same thing without even knowing it. I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
So then, the infamous background, I've got to bring this up because when we selected you as the artist, there were flags behind Elijah. There was a desk over to the side. There was this grand, fabulous lion. I asked you why you selected a lion, and you said because it reflected the spirit and the essence of Elijah in terms of how he roared in the hearing room, but also how he had a quiet, majestic presence when he was silent. And I thought that was so, so powerful. And then when I saw the final picture, all of it was gone. What happened? What happened?
Well, over time, I started to realize that a lot of the extra items, the components of the painting that I included really wasn't necessary. What I realized about what I've learned about Elijah Cummings over the past, 6 or 7 months, was he could hold his own, in any space at any time. It didn't matter. And all of those other attributes and everything else that I was putting into the painting at the beginning weren't necessary. It just took away from who he was. And I really wanted the viewer to focus on him. And that put me in a space of wanting to go back to think about the way that royalty was painted, thinking about the way that paintings were created way before I was here. And Rembrandt kept coming to my mind. And what I really loved about the paintings that the portraits that Rembrandt did, was just the subtlety in the way that the painting was created, the use of light to really create energy and aura around the figure. And just his focus on the details that were really important and kind of letting everything else fall to the wayside. And, my wife and actually my older people that I really listen to, my mentors, they've always told me that less is more, And thinking about that, I really just pondered on it, and it made perfect sense that I need to focus on exactly who Elijah Cummings was, to portray him in a manner that he deserved to be portrayed, and to not focus on everything else, because it wasn't about all of that other stuff.
Well, I want to thank you for that, because I definitely think it's a majestic portrait, and Elijah was majestic. But I got to tell you this, that, I met Elijah on the Hill. I used to work on Capitol Hill. I've been to several portrait unveilings on Capitol Hill. I've seen all of the portraits in most of the committees I've ever been in. All of them have flags. And so I was just like, oh God, there's no flag. And then I had lunch with Nancy Dorman, and Nancy was like, where's the flags? I said, well, you think I should go back and ask them to add the flags? And I think I approached you and you're like, nope. And actually, I am so glad that you said no. And this is why. Because I began to reflect on the empty space behind Elijah and realize it wasn't empty. There is an aura there, which is very important. You mentioned that word. But also, as I really began to ponder the image, Elijah is wearing red, white, and blue. And when you think about our democracy, it's not a piece of cloth with some colors on it and some symbols. It really is each one of us who represents. And I think you captured that to perfection in this piece. And so I just want to thank you for ignoring me. Thank you for saying no, because I do think the piece is just absolutely exquisite, and I do consider it a masterpiece. And so with that, Chris, I posted it on LinkedIn, I posted it on Instagram, I posted it on Facebook, I posted it on Twitter. I've gotten hundreds of thousands of hits, in terms of Elijah's portrait. Everybody seems to love it. And so, I'm sure that millions more people have seen it on the New York Times and the other publications it's run on. There is a deep interest in this portrait. And so can you tell us, Chris, what makes it a compelling portrait in the eyes of the art world?
And again, another enormous question. So I'm not sure I can sort of talk myself into the reason that Jerrell as a painter I think is so compelling to me and so many of my colleagues at the BMA. A couple of remarkable things. One is, for anybody attuned to the rhythms of the art world, you'll know that figuration over the course of the last maybe 2 years has truly ascended. And so one consequence of that ascent is a glut of figuration in the art world. So you can't really look anywhere without seeing a rendering of a likeness. And I think when you have that kind of preponderance of practice, you have to train your eye to look for those moments that are truly special within it. And I think this was the case with abstraction maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And a very similar process had to occur. It required a kind of closer looking, closer thinking than you would apply to the act of looking if there were less of it to look at. So in the case of Jerrell's work, he arrives at sort of exactly the right time and exactly the wrong time. So, Jerrell has been out of school for 3 years? I think graduated from MICA with an MFA in 2019. At that 2000, there was already a concentration, particularly of young African-American artists working with oil on canvas to produce likeness. And so so much extraordinary work, and a lot of it being shown commercially and being purchased by museums. So within the context like that, I think to distinguish yourself truly autographically in 3 years is an absolutely amazing experience. And when I say autographically, I mean you know almost immediately if you're in the presence of a Jerrell Gibbs painting. And I would apply that to the 3 paintings or the 2 paintings and 1 sketch in our collection, as well as to any work of art that I might see by him in the broader context. So that orthography within a broad range of various practices, I think, is a pretty monumental achievement given the relative brevity of his career to date. So that's the easy part to capture. And then there is the lineage of great portraiture. So the Titians, the Rembrandts, and the Velázquez's of the world. And I think many of them do use similar conceits. So those blank backgrounds that are intended to draw attention to the texture and fabric of the paint that then allows the character of the portrait to radiate from the surface. I think when you close your eyes and think about those great portraits, you don't think about any of those other details. There are no flags, there are no pins. You think about the way that figure radiates from the surface. And I think, it has to do with that investment in deep feeling and the idea that paint is a really specific medium that isn't just charged with capturing a photographic likeness at all. It's charged with capturing something that lives deep in the recesses of the subject, and then finding a way to draw that character way out so it becomes a surface effect that you can then not just see but feel. And I think that is what Jerrell does. And I know, again, droning on, the way that he investigated the life and likenesses and passions, predilections, right-handed, left-handed of Elijah, he does a really similar thing with a lot of his other portraits. So one thing I've learned in conversation with him is that he'll paint the same thing over and over and over again. So you tend to find that repetition often with abstract painters, where they're teaching themselves a certain kind of mark making so that it becomes really natural and they can do it almost without thinking. I find it really fascinating that Jerrell treats portraiture almost as abstraction, teaches himself likenesses, so that when he's rendering a face, his hand almost knows what to do. He doesn't need to look at the source material anymore. He's doing it because he remembers. And I think it's that burrowing into the soul of the person through repetition that allows for those great portraits to emerge. So, I could have just said it's a lot of hard work, but I think that's a big part of it too. I think, Jerrell's a relentless painter. He works really fast and he works constantly. And I think that's evident too in the quality of the practice.
Well, speaking of great portraits, we've got the Obama portraits that are making its round in museums across the country. I saw a friend who posted that she was, it's in LA now,
Yeah.
and they went to go see it last week. And so do you think that interest in the Obama portraits, Amy Sherrill, shout out, Baltimore-based artist now in New York area, but certainly the portrait artist for Michelle Obama, do you think that their portraits actually help to stimulate interest in Black portraiture?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, unquestionably. I think that I think I was asked by, I'm not sure which publication, but in the year of their unveiling, which I thought in the scheme of broader scheme of the art world, what was the most important thing that happened that year? And it was so self-evident to me. And I think the reason I felt so strongly that those two portraits were the most important event of that year is because we as a community, directors, curators, artists, collectors, art invested people, suddenly saw, our life's passion jump the rail all the way into the mainstream and begin to matter in an unprecedented way to a broader community of people. So I feel very strongly that whether it's being shown at the Portrait Gallery, LACMA, or elsewhere, the people coming to see those likenesses are not the people that are coming to see our contemporary wing reinstallation, for instance. So those portraits, I think, allowed us to traffic in a completely different sphere. And I will say that that was a big part of my draw towards this project too, was to try and position an emerging Baltimore-based practitioner on that line between the museum world and the mainstream to make it evident that this should matter, the work that we do should matter. Representation does matter.
Indeed, I actually remember you saying we need to find the next Amy Sherrill, or think about it as looking for the next Amy Sherrill. Again, a Baltimore-based artist who basically went big time after painting Michelle Obama's portrait. But this basically takes me back to something. When I served on the board of the Baltimore Museum of Art and we were deciding to prioritize equity, I did a little bit of research and remember a presentation that you all had, a exhibit that you all had in the museum about another time in history where Black art and Black portraits were considered, something to be pursued and to, of wide interest in the art world. And this was in the 1940s. And certainly Baltimore had its own flirtation with, elevating, artists of color at that time. And then it went away. So Chris, I want you to tell us, what's going on with race, art, and valuation in the mainstream art world right now? Are we in another cyclical moment that'll go away? And, do you think that art appreciation and valuation is tied to larger social and political phenomena? Can you give us a sense of what's going on? Mm-hmm.
So I've always been of the mind, and I think this is the great appeal of working in a museum, that we at times can guide society towards different moments of enlightenment based on the unique contributions of an artist. That's part of what we do. I also don't think that we're separate and apart as entities from broader societal forces. So it should come as no surprise that museums collecting and exhibition practices have exhibited exactly the same kind of race-based bias and gender-based bias that you see structuring history more broadly. So we're not exclusive to that history, we're simply a symptom of it. So that 1939 show that you're speaking of, Maya, I think is unbelievably interesting for a series of reasons. One is that it was the first exhibition in the major encyclopedic museum in this country to focus on the work of Black artists. So, but the reason it came about is really fascinating. So in 1938, the museum issued a survey to the city of Baltimore asking people what they wanted to see. And at that time, the resounding response was, we want to see Black artists on display in the museum. So, but the remarkable thing is the museum actually responded and did the exhibition. Now, just to be properly self-critical, when we look back at our exhibition history and felt that there was an opportunity to recreate that show, we naturally thought that objects from that exhibition would have been purchased for the museum's permanent collection, because that typifies our history as an institution. In fact, when we don't do that, we make great mistakes. In that case, we found, of course, that nothing had been purchased from the exhibition, so we actually couldn't reconstitute it. So clearly there was a call, there was a response, there was an action, but then the subsequent one that would allow us to memorialize that moment never took place. So then that in the intervening years, a focus on equity in collecting and exhibition making was not the first and foremost priority of this museum or any other museum in the country during those years. I think our feeling is that just as the Cone sisters changed the DNA of this institution when they gave their collection, we too, as a team of curators, and actually as trustees, as an artist community in Baltimore, want to perform the same operation. I think we want to say much of the most important work being made in this country today is being made by Black American artists and other artists of color. It is not only the equitable and right thing to do to collect that work, but if you're invested in excellence and relevance, it's the only thing you can do. And that's what the Cone sisters did. That's how they elevated our museum from being merely great to world-class with their gift. And I think that the task that we've set for ourselves is developing a collection for this institution that's centered in equity, that's centered in excellence, and that changes the DNA of the museum forever, just as they did. So that's the task that we're involved in. I hope, I believe that if we're determined and relentless in that, then we'll leave such an imprint on this museum and others on the broader art world that there will be no going back. It will be impossible because we will have inscribed a new canon in the one that everybody thought they knew.
Well, I stand in full support of that effort, and I congratulate you for being a national, in fact, global leader in this space. So you do think that we can basically have diverse artists be sustained over the long haul by basically being intense about it? Or do you think that there's some rule changes in terms of how the art world goes about doing its business?
Well, I don't know about the rule changes, but I do believe in the relentlessness of effort. And I do believe in the idea that we stand on, that this it isn't only an equity-based agenda. What we're engaged in here, I think, and this is going a little further in the argumentation, but is a process of reparation in consideration of a past rooted in bias that will eventually yield a future of equity. That's what I think, and that's what I hope. So the reason for this distortion in the present is a recognition of history's blind spots and biases with the promise of something true and fulsome and based in justice looking forward. And I think if museums do that work in concert, and I still believe in the influence of museums, I really do, on the marketplace, on collectors, I believe wholeheartedly in the work that we do in structure and culture. If we remain determined in that effort and begin to narrate for our publics true and just histories of art, and that's replicated across the country, I don't think there's any going back from that.
And by the way, you did mention, I mean, we've been discussing race, but you did mention gender. And I think I saw a statistic that of all of the hundreds of thousands of works of art that you have, more than 90% of them, maybe even 95% of them are from male artists.
Yeah, 96%.
96%. So, we're not just talking about race here, we're talking about gender and representation. And I am going to come back to you, Jerrell, on this one, because I read a fascinating interview that you did with Baltimore Magazine, where you said that basically you owe your success to women, Black women, who have supported you from birth to now, and that that they have been your everything. I'd like for you to extrapolate that on that, but I'd also like to say that when I look at your body of work and I think of your work, I think of the male figure, not the female figure. So can we be expecting a Queen series from Jerrell Gibbs? Because I would love to see that.
Yeah, that'll be coming when I get to it. A lot of my works now are centered around just like personal life experiences and me kind of unpacking myself. And that's not to say that that can't be represented by a woman, but I just haven't done it, to be completely honest. Yeah, I'm really, women, Black women, my family, my mother, my grandmothers, my aunts. I mean, to be completely honest, like they have been my foundation. My father was gone at such a young age, 27. I was 7 years old.
Wow.
You know, so that's a long time, you know, for me to just grow up centered around. I mean, my family dynamic growing up was my mother and my two sisters, you know, and that was in the home. So like that's all I had. My wife, I praise God for her, thankful she's consistently there. Just being a voice of reason. And this has been like throughout the duration of my life, you know, just women being there and being present and showing up at the right time to help me and to guide me in different ways, mature ways, you know. I mean, even my gallerist, Marianne Ibrahim, you know, her coming in, stepping in, being a Black woman and just championing me, you know, like right out of graduate school, you know, everybody played a pivotal role in my life and continue to, you know, and you as well, you know, like this is a monumental time. This is a monumental moment. And you are a part of this as well as a Black woman. So I'm just grateful. I'm thankful to have you all in my corner. And thank you.
So I got to tell you that Jeffrey Kent, who is a gallerist himself here in Baltimore, who seems to be, and I'm following, by the way, all of the BBAs. I call you all BBAs because of Jeffrey Kent. I once said, oh, the local artists, and he said, don't call them local, call them Baltimore based. Now we got the BBAs out there, and then there are the 4BAs, you know, the Baltimore based Black brother artists. And you all seem to like move as a tribe if they're talking about Chris Wilson or Will Watson or Ernest Shaw, or, and, you know, of course, there's Monica Kegbu and you know, so, you know, how does it feel at this moment to be a part of a community of Baltimore-based artists who are trying to do big things on a national and global scale?
It's amazing. And we're actually doing it, you know, we're finally doing it. It's beyond trying at this point. We're actually conquering, and I'm grateful. It's good to be able to celebrate this with people that you've invested time and energy to, and we all can collectively grow together. But it also speaks to Baltimore and how we operate. And that was a list, but we have a lot more, you know, of like incredible artists here in the city. But we all collectively stick together and champion each other. And what I can say and what I really appreciate about the community that I've built here in Baltimore, as it relates to like the art space and just networking and growing over time, is our ability to put our own self-interest aside and make the best decision for everybody else. You know, like that's what I really love. That's what I really enjoy. And just constantly supporting each other in any way that we possibly can. I can't speak on other places. I can't speak on other states and other countries and what happens but I know here in Baltimore, we rocking together, we're traveling together, we're going to shows together. We're pulling up on other people's shows. We having writers, like I had D. Watkins contribute to my catalog that I just, you know, that just was released through the gallery. Like we're doing everything in unit, you know, as a team, as a body, and we're stronger because of that.
So I think that's phenomenal, and everybody giving everybody else that it's not about competition, it's about everybody working together to uplift so that everybody can make it. It's not a narrow needle, it's, you know, a broad bridge, and that is phenomenal. So Jerrell, my last question for you, and you know, it might be too early for me to ask it, but what do you want your legacy to be when you think about that now?
Oh man. It goes back to just who I am. I wanted to be, I want my legacy to be, you know, he was a God-fearing man. He was a father. He was a husband that was committed to those things, committed to family, committed to being the best that I can be at my craft. And just a human, you know, living, learning, making mistakes, growing from those mistakes. And just really just real, you know, like that's what I really want more than anything. Nothing more.
Well, I think that that is a fabulous legacy. And I'm going to need somebody from the Baltimore Museum of Art team to actually tell me what the questions are. If we have some, I actually don't actually see my document. So
very good. We have a few. We don't have very long left, but I will attempt to read the most interesting. We can get through as many as possible. And of course, if anybody has a question, you can use the chat feature too. So the first one, I think this comes from Facebook. and it's clearly for Jerrell. And it says, will prints of the painting be made?
No.
Easy. Why don't you explain why? Because I think the explanation is quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm not interested in prints. And there's nothing against prints. It's my type of work, the way that I create paintings, you have to experience them in person. And to make a print of a painting of mine wouldn't do it any justice. It would take away from what I am attempting for the viewer to receive. So I'm just not into prints.
The reason why I'm laughing is because I actually proposed that at one point in the process, and I was rebuffed, and I didn't ask, well, actually I might have asked, but I didn't get an answer. Oh, actually, I think I took myself out of the equation before I got an answer. But basically, you've now just answered me. Thank you, Jerrell.
So another, and this is actually a fabulous question. Could you explain the title of the portrait and the pin on the Congressman's lapel?
Yes, the pin was actually the same lapel from the photograph that was taken of the Honorable Elijah Cummings for the cover of his book. And as far as, what was the first question? I'm sorry.
The title of the portrait.
Yes, the title. The title came from the Honorable Elijah Cummings. I think it was his inauguration, and he had a poem that he had recited. I'm sorry, the name of the artist, of the poet that did the poem is slipping me right now. But in that poem was that specific line, and it really resonated with me because it resonated with him. And he was explaining how that line was a part of everything and every fiber and every decision that he made, which also made me think about Baltimore and how Baltimore is a part of every decision, every fiber, and everything that I do as well. So it really resonated with me.
Yeah, let me just say this. Elijah always said that poem, and he lived by it. He knew that he had a life-threatening disease for more than 25 years. And so he knew every day of his life, every minute was precious, and he treated it like that. He was a man on a mission, and that poem was the theme that basically undergirded his life. So it just so happens that he had been citing it for a very long time, and it was the first House floor. It was the first, he basically said it in his first House floor speech when he got elected to Congress. And as far as the pen is concerned, all of the members of Congress every term are issued a unique member's pin. It allows them to walk fluidly throughout the entire Capitol complex without being stopped necessarily by police. And so it is a member's pin, and it usually has an eagle on it. And every term it's a different color or a different style.
Thank you, Maya.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more. So this is great too, because I think it relates very directly to an attribute that many of us associate with the congressman. So I think there is a specificity in regards to the way that Mr. Cummings' hands and the gavel are painted. Jerrell, could you elaborate a little bit on the treatment of the hands?
Yes. The reason I was, so the way that I painted the hands and the gavel is kind of similar. I was really interested in, again, you have to see this painting in person. When you get up to the painting, you get close to it, you're able to see the way that the paint was applied to the canvas to make the fingers and to make the gavel as if it's in the process of moving, just finished moving or about to. So it was about creating energy without actually making his hand move or making the gavel move. So they kind of painted in unit, they kind of paint and work together in the way that they were created, the way that they were put on the canvas. But the idea behind it was to create energy in the way that the paint strokes are put on the canvas.
Brilliant, very interesting. Last one, here we go. Chris says, well, here we go. Chris has so compellingly shared what museums need to do and how the BMA has led the way. But a question for Jerrell, what other changes would you like to see happen for paths to continue to open for you and other artists who have been historically marginalized? Fabulous question.
Indeed. I would say what I would really like to see is, you know what? I would like to see more critiques, to be completely honest. I would like to see museums open up the space to other artists that are in the community, in their particular community, and have artists come to visit, to guest speak, to talk about works and elaborate on what they see in work. So we as a unit, we as artists, we as painters, we as creators are kind of working together, taking what makes something good and able to and apply it to our work in a way that's true to us, so that we can continue to grow as creators and have longevity. I think it's very important for us to learn from each other, share each other's like ideas, and again, grow together.
Very well stated. I think, Maya, we are out of time, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you, certainly to the Baltimore Museum of Art, to Jerrell Gibbs and the other artists who contributed to this process. Congratulations, Jerrell. To all of the donors who supported this, to the selection committee, to all of the people who have come through and will come through the Baltimore Museum of Art to see the portrait in person. We just want to say thank you. But I just want to give a special, special shout out to Elijah Cummings, because Elijah loved Baltimore as much as he loved life itself. And the people of Baltimore poured into Elijah and made him who he was, and he knew it, and he carried that knowledge with him every single day. And it was reflected in his love of Baltimore, but it was also reflected in his support for youth. He firmly believed that just as he was elevated and supported in his childhood and throughout his youth, that he had, and we have to do the same thing for the youth of Baltimore today. And so this process is reflective of Elijah's wish and passion, just like his creation of the Elijah Cummings youth program. All of the young people with potential in the city, whether it's arts or other things, need to be supported. So we just encourage you to come out and see the portrait, but also to give back to the community and support our youth. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Jerrell.